Live, Guru Nation. We are live. It is almost 100 degrees here in Arizona, where Robert and I reside. It's our home. How do you like Arizona, Robert?
Man, I love it. Been here 12 years, and I think we're gonna hit triple digits this next week here, Dan. I
Yes,
mean, it's
101 here in
yeah.
Yuma. Yep.
So yeah, it's getting toasty out there,
It's
but
getting
yeah,
toasty. It's getting sizzling. The clinker research industry is sizzling despite crazy layoffs. I mean, maybe we should address the elephant in the room with the care access. Neither you or I have anything to do with it, but we're
that's true.
observers. Well, actually, have you ever been pitched by them or?
They have reached out to me shortly after the situation that made them very well known in the public
Not
eye.
after that. They reached out after that.
After that, I actually told you about that. I don't know if you remember, but I
I
was like,
remember now. I
yeah,
remember.
I was like, look at this timing. Yeah,
So
so
that's like
but
a clearance bin, like when you go to Nordstrom Rack and you go to the clearance, they're in the clearance section now. Like, hey, 90% off. Who wants to use our
yeah,
service?
almost free.
Even free, it wouldn't be worth it. People are saying
Uh,
address it. The unfortunate thing is, man, like all these real life employees, like that had really nothing to do with it, get fired. And
that's what's like, I feel really bad for those folks because obviously they had nothing to do with it. They wake up in the morning and they go in with will and integrity and doing things the way that they should. But anyways, yeah, that's pretty interesting situation that's affecting a lot of people. And I mean, I guess the good news for companies is that a lot of the talent that come out of that situation are now going to be available. So, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more good than bad, right? As they
there's a
say, a
lot.
few bad eggs spoil the bunch, but
And it's
it's
not like
unfortunate.
it was bad at similar to Theranos, where it's like clear fraud.
Right.
This was just
Exactly.
negligence. I mean, at least from what it seems, it was negligence. But I talked to a CNA from Care Access, messaged me yesterday, and she saw the writing on the wall before the fiasco, and she left. She got another job. So Care Access got her start as a CNA, became a coordinator before the drama. She got hired by someone else. So that's like there are cases like that, and if you are somebody that worked at Care Access, um, there are people that will hire you. So, but do it fast. And obviously, we reported on this like in January, and it's May now, right? Or you had like 4 months to get out, and a lot of people didn't. They stayed, and it's like you're on the sinking ship, on the Titanic.
Yeah, but Dan, the reverse, you're absolutely right. I mean, the writing is blaringly obvious on the wall, but it's tough out there, man. I'm being honest. Like I have talked, I mentor a lot of people. A lot of people reach out to me. They see me on your live, they'll ask for advice or something. And it's tough, man. It's not. I mean, yes, our
What's
industry
tough?
is
What's
hot.
tough? Like jobs?
Jobs, getting in, to the same grass that you were previously on. Grass is grass. Everyone thinks it might be greener on the other side. It's really not. And so I just, it's like you can see the writing on the wall and you're in a situation, but as we are humans, right? It's scary. It's like, change is a little bit nerve-wracking. And, then when you start engaging with these companies, you quickly realize like, wow, I might have it good where I am. And so I'm just saying it's not, I think it's a little bit more difficult, honestly, from my perspective than it is said, done. I
Well,
mean,
of course, of course.
obviously you can't be lazy about it. We've talked about this, right? You got to check your ego at the door. Everyone talks about their, how they got into this industry and things like that. But, for those people at Care Access specifically, why we're talking about this, right? I don't blame them in a sense for sticking around even after that situation happened, because the market is what it is. There's a lot of different dynamics for people, and here's Timothy in the comments. I've actually, Tim has reached out to me for advice before, right?
Mm.
How you doing, Tim? Thanks for joining the live here. And Tim, talk about a qualified guy. I mean, he was at a large pharma. I'm not going to say the name, so we don't get
Why is it
get too
hard?
bad.
Let's just use Tim as an example. Like, for someone
Well,
that clearly, like you and I can see, because I've had conversation with Tim too through
yeah.
emails, and uh, you would think, okay, well, this guy's gonna get hired. Like, why not? He is a great asset.
You would, and he's got a great attitude. I mean, he goes way above and beyond, for his training and credentialing. It's just at the end of the day, Dan, I just actually this week, it was funny. I was talking with another small biotech leader, and
Love them.
yeah, we love them, right? But like, I mean, and again, I'm speaking for a very narrow audience right now, but we as companies, and I don't care if you're a 20 head count or even 100 head count, right? If you have a 100 head count company and they're broken up into different departments, those departments become even smaller. So you're talking 10 to 15 per department, right? Dan, here's the $1 million thing. We don't have the time to train somebody. You have got to get in the
Wow.
game, roll your sleeves up, and run with that ball. I
So
don't
you
have
think the
time to.
sites are the ultimate launching pad then?
Well, I really do. And everybody who reaches out
Because
to
we
me, I
have no
always say, like,
choice at sites. Like we have to train our
well,
staff. We have no
you
choice.
you do, but also I think it's critical. Like, how can like I always use this metaphor. I always say, how can you be the general if you've never been the soldier? You know?
Mm,
And
mhm.
you can't, because it's like I work with project managers all the time that have never been a CTM, a clinical lead, a CRA. I mean, it's like it's mind blowing to me. It's like, wait a minute, a year ago you were in a real estate office filing papers, and now you're running a global clinical trial. Like, what?
And
And
that's
so
true story. That happens.
it happens. I mean, I mean, there's people. I'm hoping people will come into the comments and corroborate what I'm saying. But I'm telling you, Dan, it's actually more frequent than not. So in terms of a launching pad, yeah, I believe it. The site level is critical. Like for me, when I was just having this conversation with a scientific board advisory member. I was like, we can all sit at our desks like you and I are right now. We can design a protocol, we can come up with a budget, we can come up with everything, but does anybody stop to say, wait a minute, what's the patient experience going to be if we implement this in the protocol? What's the site experience going to be if we implement this in the protocol? Everybody sits behind these circular tables and they design these insanely complex studies, and you're living proof of it, right, Dan? And nobody stops and
I
says, wait
talked
a
to
minute.
you off air about it. I mean, we're
Yeah,
friends. I share things like, hey,
right.
what do you think about this? This is like, it's some of it is like insane, man. I don't know. Do you think it's like it's not incompetence? Do you think it's just greed?
It's not. I don't think it's either. I think it's just. I think I don't know if the right word is incompetent. I mean, these are very competent people, right?
Yeah,
They're very
yeah.
smart people. I just think it's a
Way more
matter of,
competent than me.
and possibly even me, right? I mean,
Yeah,
gosh, right? But what I think it is again, we talk about the launching pad. Let's go back to the center of our conversation, right? These people simply do not have the frontline experience to understand what the impact is at the patient level, at the site level, and therefore it's just overlooked. It's not a matter of incompetence or greed. It's just they don't get it. Right? It's like, wait a minute, what if you were the patient? What if it was your loved one? What if it was your mother or father or your brother or sister, right?
that's why when I
Then,
send emails like that, like the ones I sent to this particular sponsor bypassing the CRO, we got action right away because they see it. Like they're not used to hearing from the sites because the CRO, and this is going to lead into our topics in a bit. I mean, we're not going to slam dunk on CROs, but their sponsors put them there, and then they kind of shield all communication between sites and sponsor, and they'll absorb it, right?
right.
And but that doesn't mean the sponsor doesn't want to know what's going on, and not just from the CRO. They want to hear maybe from the sites too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I love hearing from sites, especially my sites. Again, I'm a huge advocate, as everybody should know by this point, of sites. I try and do
Sure.
everything I possibly can for our sites, right? And when a site reaches out directly to me and gives me some information, I can oftentimes I do take that back at the right time and I deliver that feedback. And it's definitely a situation that we have to be cognizant of. But I encourage sites to make sure they know who I am, how to contact me. Obviously, I don't want them sidestepping the CRO 100%. That's not the purpose of that, right?
Right.
But I want them to make sure that they understand that they have a point contact, that they can be heard when they need to be heard, you
But
know?
you're a study. I should have introduced you properly, but this is like the fifth time where you're on, and maybe more.
Oh
So
yeah,
people,
probably we're a dozen over a dozen guys.
Robert is so unique, guys and gals. All right, he's sponsor level. He has CRO expertise, but he's a study director for small biotechs, and he really is a site advocate. I mean, my interactions with Robert over these last 2 years, maybe a year and a half, is like it kind of made me see the sponsor side very differently than what I pictured in my head. Because I never really had like the one on one with as high up as Robert is at any sponsor until now. But Robert, you taught me that you guys are not inaccessible, especially when it's a smaller sponsor. Like
Right?
it's not hard. Even if I didn't know you, it wouldn't be hard to find you on
Yeah,
LinkedIn. Like just Google and or search on LinkedIn, and I would find you. And from my experiences, now that I've started doing that, these sponsor level guys, they actually and gals really appreciate hearing from me.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's not we're not I'm never a person to hide under the rug. I want sites to come out, because again, it's that I still firmly believe that's our bread and butter. Those are our closest allies. I want sites to work with us again. I want
Do
sites
you
to
think
personally work with me again.
why? Let's do that first. Why do you want sites to
Well,
work with you again?
when a site that's is familiar with our processes, the way we operate, especially our asset, like Yuma Clinical Trials, right, Dan? I want your experience to be so great that you're like, you know what? Whatever's in the pipeline, sign me up. And it's a mutual symbiotic relationship, right? You enroll great, you produce great data, the CRAs have phenomenal feedback of your site, your staff, and that just it's like scratching each other's back, right?
Right,
And so that experience, it's a lot. Again, it's the training curve, right? I come to you and I'm like, hey, we have another study. You're familiar with the asset, you're familiar with the process, you're familiar with the expectations in terms of
right.
the nuances with a transdermal application, right? So
Do
it
you
makes
think
things a lot easier, I think.
do you think that sites and CROs could have the same symbiotic relationship or do you think the sponsor site symbiosis is on a different level?
I think it's a completely different level. I think CROs actually hold a lot more power over that symbiotic relationship because sites don't want to generally upset
Yeah.
CROs, right? Because it's like, oh, well, we're going to blackball you and not give you any study from any sponsor, right? So you like, I again over a decade on the CRO side, right? Working for the large ones, pick whatever favorite three-letter name you want. I've been there. Um, you know, and some as long as over 5 years, so it's not like these short little stints, right? And I was everything from a project associate to a clinical research associate to a principal CRA to a trainer, a mentor, a CTM, all the way as a project manager at these CROs. And Dan, literally, like there is a blacklist. I promise you, I've seen it with my own eyes,
Wow.
and
But what
it
do you
it
get on that blacklist for? Just low enrollment, bad data?
I
Do you
wouldn't
get on
say
there for
low and
complaining a lot?
Dan, there's a host of reasons.
Man, that's what I'm
People,
afraid of.
you can go to the site intelligence or site identification group within the CRO, and you can end up on that list. So when I'm saying about like the CRO site relationship versus the sponsor site relationship, I think it's completely different dynamic. If like for me, right, I'm a small biotech, right? We have two studies, we have a third that's upcoming in the next, maybe Q3, Q4 of this year, if timing is perfect, and obviously, um, that's another study. But if I'm a CRO and I've given you, dozens of studies, right, across multiple sponsors, across multiple therapeutic areas, you know, you're going to be a little bit more timid against the CRO, and you're going to be like, well, screw Robert and his one study opportunity. There's a lot more fish in the sea. You know what I mean? So from that perspective, it's like kick rocks, pound sand, whatever you want to call it, and we're done with you. So that's why the CROs hold this tremendous power, even with
Hmm.
vendors, right? Even with vendors, it's like I talked to a vendor yesterday and I was telling them, we were talking about a budget and how the budget was totally mismanaged and it was around like, whatever. I don't want to get into too many details, but the point of the story is I actually was talking with my counterparts at the CRO and I was like, hey, you guys have a lot more pull in this situation than I do. I'm a singular client. You guys have awarded this particular vendor a dozen studies, and this issue we're facing was systemic across the dozen studies that you gave them. And if you threaten to pull the dozen studies or future work, what's more impactful monetarily? The
Yeah,
dozen studies or the singular study that I'm as just one client? So I think it's a completely different level.
it's it's something that is going to be interesting to see how it unfolds because as things like DCT, decentralized clinical trials, gain popularity, and then I mean, you we watch them implode before our eyes. I mean, Care Access is like the perfect example, but also like Sciences 37, the others have had mass layoffs. The CROs try, in a way, they do have the power. They try to implement these things to protect themselves. They don't really want to change. We said at the beginning, employees are afraid of change. CROs are also like any company is as well. Like if something's working for them and they figured out how to extract profit and maximize shareholder value, they're going to keep doing that. They don't want change. So in a way, right, the any inefficiencies that exist that a CRO could in theory fix, they don't want to necessarily because
Yeah, there's
why?
no.
Why them?
Yeah, right. Why? What's the incentive for them to be more efficient? What? So that they can reduce the FTE and reduce the budget? That's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
It's always like, oh, we'll tell you what you want to hear. Dan, look, I'll tell your audience this. I've been through like RFP processes, requests for proposals when you're looking for a different, maybe another CRO or whatever the case may be, right? You typically bid, a request, send an RFP to 5, 6 CROs, just as an
Mhm.
example, and then you attend these bid defense meetings, right? I just want to tell you, like within that realm of the 5, 6 bids that we had, only one CRO came back and said, Robert, we may not be the best fit for you. I cannot tell you the amount of respect that I now have for this organization, because it's like they didn't tell me what I wanted to hear and agree with my assumptions. They told me your enrollment rate expectation is bananas.
Was that a small CRO?
It was actually a
Yeah.
small CRO, maybe less than a 500 head count. I'll tell you off the air, who this is, right?
All right.
But my point is, all the other ones, right? Again, pick your favorite 3 letters or 5 letters. Um, oh yeah, sure. No, this is great. The only thing we might have to do is just increase your site number. But from a sponsor perspective, the more sites you have, and I think this is a general rule, the more quality in terms of data issues you're going to encounter. It's a fact. That's just the way it is. It's the way the cookie crumbles. And that's really something that we always consider. But
The more site, yeah.
yeah, the more sites you have, the more, likely you are. So
But
even if
isn't
my
that
sample
risk
size.
like spread around more? Like, let's say you have a study with 10 sites or a study with 50. I mean, your risk is spread around more with 50 sites as opposed to 10.
Exactly, exactly. So there's always, when you're looking at strategies, when you're behind in timelines, there's always the recruitment service avenue. There's always the additional, adding additional sites. There's activating backup sites that already have a CTA, ready to go. There's all these different strategies, but then you have to consider, that, and I'm not talking like 10 versus 20 or 25 versus 50, Dan. I'm talking like 50 versus 100, right? Like that's where you start to see significant data quality issues start to kind of present itself. But there's a lot of different things to consider, and it's pretty amazing that the CROs tell you what you want to hear as a sponsor. They'll like, oh sure, we can do this, with the caveat of they know we're going to hit them with a change order. You know,
Yeah.
And then now it's like the original value of the contract was, I'm just throwing a number out there. Let's call it 15 million, right?
Yeah.
Now you're a year and a half or 2 years into, the study, and now your contract value is 25 million. It's like, wait a minute, how did we work so far out of scope? It's because they understood what it was going to take. They have so much more intelligence and data than we have, right? They've conducted, assuming they've conducted studies in this therapeutic area. They know what the likely enrollment rates are post COVID, pre COVID.
Hmm.
They know this information, Dan. They know the historical performance of sites. They know whether or not you're going to need
They
to
know,
implement,
but you
you
know
know?
what? They've known for the last 2 decades. But you know what's happening with tech vendors like Versatile, Inato, all these like even Metadata, like the big ones, Metadata, Viva. They're starting to, if they don't have already, they at least have the potential to have accurate numbers on sites from
Yeah,
previous studies. And this is something no one's discussing, but this is something that the CROs had a monopoly on. And
yeah,
now, because of tech and the site's willingness to go digital, little by little, CROs are kind of they're they're losing their monopoly over this information. They used to be the custodians of the information. They used to be like the oracles. Like,
right.
come to me, I can tell you who's good and who's not, and in which lands you can have high randomizations. But now it's more of an even playing field, and it's just starting, Robert. It's just
100%.
starting.
Yeah.
It's the beginning. I'm actually excited about this.
I'm excited too. And it's funny. I don't remember who I was having this conversation with. It might have even been you, Dan. Forgive me. But I was like feasibility means nothing anymore. Like
Right.
why even go through the exercise of feasibility?
What would be
It
ideal feasibility for you, like for your study?
Well, it's just capability, because at the end of the day, it's like if you automatically know you're going to have to pivot to a recruitment vendor or a platform, because it's not even, and it's funny because it's changed so much, right? Like you and I have had offline topic, discussions around recruitment vendors, right? They offer so much more than just the old, oh, we're just going to put up a social media ad and hope someone
Mhm.
clicks and route them to their closest site. No, they offer so much more these days. So honestly, like when I'm looking at, scoping out a study and looking at an operational budget, I would include them from the get-go,
Yeah.
because you can't all of a sudden, like the old days, right, Dan, we would always reflect on historical performance. What kind of database do you have? How many patients in your PI's database meet the preliminary inclusion exclusion criteria? And everything was about your existing database, right? Because nobody wanted to implement these recruitment services until it was a last resort. But now what I'm seeing is, you know, these are implemented from the ground up, and it's a lot easier to implement them from the start. But then the other side of that coin is, do sites now become, I don't want to say lazy, but do they become complacent and rely on these leads only?
Right.
Because Dan, you're a site owner. It takes manpower and time for your staff to comb your EHR or your
Oh my
EMR,
gosh.
right?
I had a conversation with my PI the other day. We're using a very difficult study. I've been telling you about it that we have
Yeah.
started using a recruitment vendor that's actually good for once, right?
Hmm.
It's One N Health. I'll give them a shout out because I like them. I interviewed them on the podcast before. They're sending us qualified leads. We have our first couple of randomizations thanks to them. It's an
It's
almost
amazing.
impossible study. Well, the crazy thing is, I was talking to my PI about one of these leads we got that's about to randomize. Did you know this patient is part of my PI's private practice? Although he's not the provider, he's in charge of 10
Wow.
providers. This patient, we our database is so huge. You've been to our site, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's two sites like that. Even I've only been to one. I've only been to the one you've been to. There's another one in the foothills that's probably half the size, but has like 4 providers in there.
Wow.
We're not getting any of those leads. This database is so huge, man. We have no way to like comb through it. We haven't gotten the AI plugins and all that yet. So we're getting our own patients back to us
So
from ads from
there you
somebody else.
go. Like that's my point, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so so sponsors and CROs need to come to terms with reality and stop saying, oh well, You haven't done like Dan. I had a conversation with a site like a year and a half ago. I ended up closing this particular site. He's like, PI was like, I don't have time to sell your study. He's like,
Wow.
I need a trifold pamphlet or something to hand the patient. And it's like if they're already on my, at my site, they're here for, treatment. They're not here to hear about a clinical trial. So the message I've been hearing over and over and over from the sites in a roundabout way is they don't have the time to pre-screen an EMR because you literally have to I mean, I've been to sites when I was a CRA. I've been to sites where they literally have a whole office wing, 9, 10 cubicles, people with headsets on that are strictly cold calling from the database.
Yeah, yeah,
You literally, if you don't have that dynamic or at least a dedicated resource doing that 8 hours a day,
yeah.
like it's funny because sponsors and CROs expect you guys to be doing this stuff.
Right,
I
right,
expect it, but that's just unfortunately not the reality. So when you bring in the recruitment vendor, you know, it's now the sites are just either doing one of two things. They're waiting for leads or they're waiting for a patient to walk in the door that
right.
might see a flyer while they're sitting there and asks you about this particular study. But the legwork, like the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
It's really not because if a provider walks you a patient over and you're going to screen
Yeah,
him right then and there, that's 3 to 4 hours,
there you go.
right? That's 3 to 4 hours. I'm not going to look through the EMRs, and then the day's over when that's done because we worked hard. Go get
Yeah.
lunch, go home, do it again the next day.
Yeah, I mean it's and that's the thing, right? And so I just I'm a huge proponent of just being I like reality. It's funny because somebody came to me recently, literally this week, and they were like, "Well, here's the reality to get us to the end, and here's a possible change order we could implement now with the caveat that we're gonna have to do another one later." I'm like, why even present the ladder to me? Like, I don't want to know about another. I want to know what it's going to take to complete the mission, right? Don't give me some like, false sense of something that's going to just get me to an artificial time point, right? So I'm just trying, like it's the same idea. You know what I mean? It's understanding the reality. I always like to be a real, like you have to live in reality, right? And so for me, this is why I'm saying the feasibility process is so antiquated and useless because sites are going to do one of two things. They're either going to overinflate their number to ensure the study's awarded to them,
They all
or
do.
they might say, you know what, if I'm too honest, I might not get the study.
That's Chris. Chris Sauber did that.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like where's the middle? So that's why it's like, you know what, I don't even care anymore about how many patients are in your database because there's no guarantee that they're going to meet all the criteria that we have.
No.
And I don't care how detailed your pre-screener is or your local IRB approved pre-screen consent, even before you consent the patient, whatever your process is,
Yeah.
it's not going to guarantee it. So when you start using a company that you mentioned, something like that, that's giving you really well qualified leads, like Dan, why would you spend the time to comb your database or
We don't.
dedicate?
Honestly, we don't anymore for that
There you
study. The
go.
leads are flowing in faster than we can handle them, and
Yeah.
it's a very difficult study. It's not like yours. It's like twice the work as yours.
Yeah. So now go back and ask yourself, the feasibility process, right? When you did initial feasibility as a whoever reached out to you and asked you to be
Yep.
part of the study, it's like, was it none of that was even
Here's how
factual,
that
valid?
worked. Here's how that worked, and here's how it works a lot of the time. Okay, we were a rescue site. They sent me because we've worked with this hero before. Hey, we got another study, same indication. You did well on our last one. Here's another one, same indication. You're
Hmm.
a rescue site. We need this feasibility back today, please, so that we can start the startup regulatory. So I didn't have time to look at the synopsis protocol. I just saw the
Sure.
diagnosis and I saw it was similar to the other one we did as far as what they're looking for. And I filled it out. Like they wanted it fast, like that day. I had to stop
Mm,
what I was doing and do that. So then by the time we get the protocol and then the SIV, SSV, then SIV, then we're starting to think like, wow, this study is actually way more complicated than we thought, but we're this far into it. Let's just do it. I mean, we can get some screen failures from our other study, put them in here. No, no, no. Not when there's 55 exclusion criteria, Robert.
My
55.
goodness.
5
Wow.
5. Junior Seau, rest in peace.
Jeez, Louis. I
55.
mean, that's just exclusion. Forget to mention even the inclusion.
Oh, yeah, forget that.
I
Yeah.
mean, wow. Yeah.
So
You're
that's
looking
how it
for the,
works.
yeah, that's
So
how it
how
works.
good was my feasibility? I'm going off of another study. I was pretending it was our other study when I was filling out this feasibility.
Yeah,
I literally was like, okay, they want me to do this in the next hour. What did we put in our last study? I know our database, so let me put those numbers in. Boom, boom, boom. I didn't filter them through their synopsis.
right, right.
That's how it works most of the time, man. These site directors are not going to read a protocol they don't know they have yet. Who's going to
Exactly.
spend hours reading a protocol? I mean, that you're supposed to, but who's going to actually do that when they're telling you, "Hey, rescue site, we need you activated in a month."
Yesterday. Yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like, wait a minute, I didn't
yeah,
even know about this study yesterday. You wanted to activate me
exactly,
today. Yeah.
exactly.
No, I totally hear you. And that's why I'm saying I think the whole feasibility process is just, it's just not, it's not like it used to be, right, Dan? Because before these recruitment services were around, let's go back circa 10 years,
Yeah.
like you had to rely historically on the PI's database,
Well,
right?
here's this. Like your study is easy. Let's say you have a difficult study, okay,
Yeah.
and you want me as a rescue site, and you give me a survey and say, "Hey, I need this done by end of day. We can get you up and running. Like, we'll have your SSV next week. Just give us this thing today." That's basically what happened. All
Right.
right, so they want me to just complete it for the sake of completing it. What good is it going to be for you knowing you have a difficult study for me to use historical data on my other study that was a lot simpler? Like,
Exactly.
what how valuable are those numbers for you?
Zero value. And then what the CRO is doing is they're taking that survey that you just completed ad hoc, let's say, right away, right? And they're showing it to the sponsor and they're being like, hey, look, we found this phenomenal rescue site. Look at what they're promising.
Look at their
And
historical data.
right. And then the sponsor's like, "Oh, great, get them going, rock and
Yeah,
roll, like
yeah,
whatever they." And then that's what I mean, right? So I just think the whole process needs to be revamped. And again, the minute Dan people start using these recruitment vendors, sites stop their processes, and I don't blame them because it's not it takes a minute, right? Some of these vendors have these warm transfers and cold
yeah,
transfers, and
yeah.
the warm transfers, you got Mrs. Johnson on the phone, and she verbally passed your phone screen, and now she's like, okay, well, hold on, Mrs. Johnson, I'm gonna call up Dan Sfera at Yuma Clinical Trials and see if I can get him on the phone or one of his coordinators. Just hang on, I'll be right back with you. Puts her on hold, calls you, hey Dan, it's so and so from this, and I have Mrs. Johnson, she's pre-qualified. I'm now gonna bring her on the line. Oh, hi, Mrs. Johnson, meet Dan. And Dan is now going to take it from here and he's going to make sure you have a wonderful experience. And if there's anything that we can do for you, great. Boom. Now there's, like that's the warm transfer method, right?
Yep, yep.
Dan, so now you've been pulled away. You're now talking to Mrs. Johnson on the phone or Mr.
Right.
Johnson. And now that's another 30 minutes of your time. And now you're trying to schedule them and you're asking them questions even deeper than the pre-screen that they just had, and you're asking them additional, and now you're like, all right, maybe we can get them in for a screening visit. They'll come in or they'll pick up a copy of the ICF and they'll take it home. But now you've dedicated, who knows, an hour at this point before the patient's even on your schedule. Patient comes in, it's another 2-3 hours of your time. They consent only to screen fail. It's like, so now all this time that you've just spent, like, and you expect, and sponsors and CROs expect that sites are still pre-screening their database simultaneously.
Right.
It's like, I get it. If you have an infrastructure of 20, 30 people at a site level, sure, this is a
Well, you
feasible
forgot half
process.
the time they don't show up after you did that hour phone call.
There you go. I apologize. That's a huge point to make. You're right.
And a
Half the
few of
time,
those in a row, you're like, why not just make it 5 minutes now? Or why not just have them come in? Forget the 1 hour call.
yeah, just have them come in and sign the ICF and throw it at the wall and hope it sticks,
And now you
right?
got another screen fail. Now you're increasing your likelihood of screen failures. So
There you go. So it's a
this
whole
stuff's
lot
not
of
that simple.
no, it's a whole lot of wasted effort, right? It's a whole
Hmm.
lot of wasted effort that kind of just yields no fruit. And we need to change the feasibility process.
Well, there's
altogether
another
because
there's another issue with these recruitment vendors that people don't talk about. It's the loss of it's the opportunity cost of doing something else. So prior to this study that I'm telling you about, we have not had any recruitment vendors. So it was just all of the studies we've had were our patients. Do you know how many no shows I had from June of 2021 until our first no show? I remember February 2023.
wow,
So from June 2021 until about January 23, that's a year and a half.
yeah,
We were just organic, our own database, zero no shows. Patients showed up if they were sick because they know, hey, this is my doctor wants me to do this study. Like I'm gonna go. Once we turned on that recruitment vendor, even a good one, 50%. We expect it half the time now, Robert. I tell the coordinator, hey, all this preparation. What if they don't show up? Let's wait till they show up first.
you got it.
Half the time they don't show up. Then you're just sitting around.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's crazy, Dan. And these are the things that sponsors, CROs sometimes don't think of.
Hmm.
It's like just this knee-jerk reflex reaction. Add sites, add rescue sites, add a recruitment vendor, do an amendment. It's like, wait a
Hmm.
minute. Like, how does this impact the site? How does this impact the current patients, right? Nobody thinks about that because everybody's hell bent on meeting the milestone and timeline
Yeah.
you know and everybody needs to take a breath and take a pause and look at the impact of the decisions that are being made, because some have pros, some have cons, they all, and you have to outweigh the risk versus the benefit ratio. And then, of course, what the monetary impact is going to be on the overall study itself. When you're working at a small biotech that doesn't have an approved product and you're completely investor or VC funded, every dollar counts, right?
Those guys don't want to hear about potential. They
They
want to
don't.
know what's happening. What do you do
You
for me
got it.
lately? Like Janet
You got
Jackson.
it. Exactly.
Okay, Rekka says, we'll go 5 more minutes, okay, Robert? Rekka
Yeah,
says,
yeah.
just like we have client satisfaction recommendation surveys at hospitals or labs, they need to have a similar concept for sponsor CROs to get the input from sites as well periodically. What do you think about this? I never answer those. Well, I don't want to blackball myself, but I don't like answering those CRO. How did we do surveys? Like you should know how you did.
Yeah, Dan, and it's funny because I just had this conversation. I would actually encourage you to answer those surveys
Okay,
because it's critical feedback. I mean, like, look, I'll give you an example, right?
it's
And
more
again,
work.
no, well, it's more work, but I don't want anybody to hate me. But look, I'll be the first one to say, like when I was a CRA, I wasn't 100% of the time on site for 8 hours. I wasn't, right? You got flights to catch, whatever. You go here, you go there. But if you're not on site for 8 hours, how is anyone going to know other than the site completing a survey like that, a
Right,
satisfaction
right.
survey? They say, are you satisfied with the CRA who did your visit? Were they supportive? Are you satisfied with the communication pathway, the plan? What time did your CRA arrive? What time did your CRA leave? Were they prepared? Did they have questions?
Man, they
You know,
got a snitching on these CRAs. I love my CRAs. I haven't had
yeah,
any bad ones so far.
that's amazing to hear.
Knock
But
on
I'm
wood.
just saying, like this is critical feedback because then when I realized that, the clearing rate or the backlog is not increasing because the CRA team was on site for 5 hours, not eight, how are we ever supposed to know this, right? And it could be a very good reason. I mean, it could be like, well, this, that, and the other, but the expectation really is like, hey, if you're on site for 8 hours, you don't have to get on a plane and fly home. You can stay in a hotel,
Stay
have
the night.
dinner,
Yeah.
yeah, stay the night. But I used to make my own decision and say to myself, hey, I'm gonna fly home because I want to. And if I decide to land at 1 o'clock in the morning, that's my choice, right?
Right, right.
But at the end of the day, you know, I would if I cut my visit short, I would make sure unequivocally that there were no backlog, there were no pages, there were no action items. Like everything was resolved and done, you know? So in the event that because I knew these surveys were being sent, Dan, you know, and I knew it. So, that's anyways. I mean, it's up to you
Man,
whether or not, but I get it. You're busy. You're busy.
yeah. But just being a nice CRA and listening to the sites, like the ones we have, whenever we run into payment issues first of all they're not aware, and then second of all they understand and they try to escalate it. Like as long as the CRA's pleasant and or even
Yeah.
friendly and try to be helpful, like the sites are going to give them a good scores. I think the issues I've had have been higher up the chain with the
Mm.
CROs. It's never the CRA. I actually feel for them.
Yeah.
Like so, they maybe on the surveys if they ask like about the whole process, not just the CRAs, they get more information out of it. Some of these central vendors think
Oh,
that they're the ones calling. They think the study's about them. It's
yeah.
not about you.
It's
I don't want to
true.
go on a rant.
No, it's
Uh,
true.
recruitment vendor, lots of no shows. Yeah, and even the good ones, Elantra, even the good ones. Like, do some pharma companies have their own internal CRO like sections? For example, Novo Nordisk. And what is the difference of such? So they're talking about like that preferred functional service provider, right? Model.
Yeah.
What do you think
Yeah.
of this?
Yeah, I mean some have I would say counterparts and they internalize maybe monitoring, but they use the DM or something like that or pharmacovigilance or safety. I'm only aware of a few biotech companies that actually have approved products that really don't even use CROs at all.
Yeah.
I think that's the ambition, like I mean I would love to be able to do that one day, that's obviously a long-term goal,
You think that's the
but
future though? Like
boy,
using the CRO infrastructure. So I'm not going to name the name, but there's a big pharma we're working with on a study. Hopefully, we're starting next month. Um, Probably by the end of the next month. Huge big pharma. They have a FSP, functional service provider, with a CRO. But you know who did our SSV?
hmm,
The sponsor.
see?
There was no five-letter CRO to be used. And then they told me, even at the SIV, the CRO is coming, but they work for us. Like they're using that FSP model.
Yeah,
And so it seems like they're trying to get the best of both worlds because they can afford it. And you've talked about this before with the big sponsors being able to afford the A team, B team. But then I've talked to CRO people that said there's no such thing. This is a
right,
myth.
right.
So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's Dan. I don't think any CRO intentionally, like I don't really think there's such a thing as an A, B, or C team. I really don't believe that, right? What ends
Okay.
up happening is that your principal CRAs, your super experienced CRAs are just allocated to a sponsor at this point, right? So you're not going to rip away that from a 100 $200 million portfolio to assign them to a smaller fish in the pond. And so what ends up happening is people like smaller biotechs end up getting new hires, or people with much less experience, maybe a lower amount of years, maybe they don't have as
Yeah.
much experience in that therapeutic area that you would like. So you end up getting these resources. And then as a result of that, you start looking at the quality issues down the road. And then you're like, you call it the C team, but they're really not, it's not intentionally the C team.
So yeah, that's what I'm starting to think too. But so like the difference between you and let's say Pfizer, and I'm not working with Pfizer, so that's I'm just gonna name them. Like the what you're doing when you source a CRO for your study, do you actually look at every CRA that's going to be assigned to every site
So,
and request a change or no?
well, you ask for this information, but during the bid defense, I mean, honestly, they bring you the team and they don't ever tell you what CRAs are going to be assigned to your study. They really don't. You'll be lucky if you even have a clinical lead in the bid proposal.
In
What
the
they
bid
will tell,
proposal, yeah.
yeah, what they will tell you is they'll tell you who the project manager is going to be, who the director levels will be, who the VPs will be. Like they're going to tell you the high level core team,
But
but
when do they tell you, like individual, like at kickoff meeting or what?
pretty much essentially, right? You at the kickoff meeting you're going to be introduced to the clinical lead that you've never even heard of before. And honestly, Dan, a lot of the
Would
contracts
Pfizer get the same treatment as you?
probably not. They
Okay.
would get a they would if the VP at Pfizer of a certain area said, "Hey, this person does not satisfy our requirements. they're gonna jump through some hoops.
So why do they
But
treat you different, man? You're paying
well,
the same money, right?
that's I think everybody can answer that for themselves, right? I mean, it's really
Man,
you're right though. I mean, it's an unfair thing, but it's reality, you know. Um, Again, it's business, it's capitalism, right? I mean, it's this. They're not doing this stuff gratis. They're doing this for profit. This isn't a 501(c)(3) charity, you know.
yeah,
And so at the end of the day, it's business. I mean, it's
yeah,
unfortunate, but it is what it is. And Dan, it's like it's like a sponsor that has a great track record. You're gonna probably want to do more business with them than you are with somebody who gives you trouble. Whether
sure.
that means constantly bombarding you with emails, phone calls, or bad resources, or whatever it may be. I mean, it's just a very simple but complex concept because we shouldn't be treated differently. Everybody should be treated the same way, but unfortunately there's powerful people out there that can make a phone call, and it's the same thing with approvals, right? I mean, it's the same thing when you go for a company who has never been approved
Mm,
versus you constantly see every other day it's like, oh, FDA approved this, FDA approved that, and it's like
I
it's the
see.
same it's the same six companies, right? When's the last time you heard a small emerging biotech get a smashing approval, right? I mean, it's
But you know what? And we'll end it on this because I have another Zoom right now. But site networks are becoming loose alliances, site
Yep.
networks. Layer that with tech. So, what does tech ultimately do? Tech is like an enzyme. It'll make something that was supposed to happen but take a lot of energy, like happen in a shorter period of time. That's tech. Add a layer of tech on top of a loosely allied site network. You may be getting closer to managing a study on behalf of a sponsor better than a CRO might.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not. But if we gave research on a bus a chance, right?
Right.
Why not give this a chance? And who knows? Maybe some entrepreneur out there is watching, say, you're gonna do it.
Yeah, just like Heather is saying here, this is really what we aspire to do. It's just there's a lot of challenges to get it this way, and
Yeah.
when you have your own internal staff, you really have a lot more control over the quality and experience that sites will have. So
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of it.
And a company of your size, they need actionable results now. So it's oftentimes investing in a tech seems unnecessary because it is more expensive to license that tech yourself than to outsource it to a CRO who has a bundle of tech that they're already
Exactly.
paying for. So I think
Exactly.
I think that's like that rate determining step. But I mean, if tech's supposed to get cheaper, faster, better, and it's only 2023, so just connect the dots maybe a little bit.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, Anyways,
Future's bright.
Robert, we gotta do more of these, man. Like I don't want to rush. The
Absolutely.
next one could go 3 hours. Okay, we'll
We
have
could.
Brad, we'll have Chris, we'll have Fox, we'll have Monica, but all the site owners I know, and
Yeah.
you, Rod Raphael, get on here, man. Um, Everybody go connect with Robert. He's a site advocate. So if you're a site, you definitely need to connect with Robert. If you're a CRA, you definitely need to connect with Robert. If you're anyone in the space tech company, we mentioned the tech companies. They're going to get way more important this decade. And the CROs are going to try to become tech companies or just acquire them, is my prediction. Um, Connect with Robert, right? Underneath the
Thanks,
show
everyone.
notes. Thank you, Robert. Have a good one, guys. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Bye bye.
Bye bye.